We are privileged this morning to have with us Tim Moody. Tim grew up hunting and fishing while living in communities across Ontario, Quebec, Newfoundland, and the Canadian Arctic. He received an honors BSc from Lakehead University in 1982. During his summer hiatus from university, Tim worked for the Canadian Hydrographic Service, operating survey vessels on Lake Nipissing, Lake Huron, and in the North Channel. Tim joined Peel Regional Police in 1983 and worked as a uniformed constable, including time spent on the Marine Unit. He joined the MNR in 1987 as a conservation officer and worked in both the Armstrong and Chapleau areas, doing field enforcement as well as participating in the MNR's black bear and polar bear projects. Tim moved to Thunder Bay as the enforcement supervisor, then to the Sioux to supervise the new communications unit. A move to Peterborough as a program advisor led to a promotion to Regional Enforcement Operations Manager. Tim currently fills the role of Manager, Intelligence and Investigation Section of the Enforcement Branch. We're delighted that he agreed to come and to chat with us today, so please welcome Tim Moody.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here. I'll apologize right now if I break out into a coughing spell. I've been fighting this for months, like a lot of us are, I think, so bear with me. So, what am I going to talk about? I was asked to come and talk about emerging techniques in natural resources law enforcement. So first of all, is that science or magic? It's kind of some of both. Talk about the intelligence unit that we have in the enforcement branch. Talk a little bit about how DNA is used in wildlife enforcement. Talk about online enforcement that we do. Joint forces operations, talk a little bit about how different agencies work together. And then I'll talk about the fun stuff, the gadgets and gizmos that we use. Now, to start, you always try and start off a talk with a joke, so we're going to talk about government intelligence. Or, what can I say? Excuse me. So, intelligence in the context of law enforcement, or natural resources law enforcement, is actually really important. The term is actually, it's incorrectly used, even in law enforcement circles. Raw information isn't intelligence. The fact that the door is over there, that's information. Intelligence is the door is over there, there's a hallway out there, there's food, there's coffee around the corner, all of the things brought together. That's what makes intelligence. Another catchphrase you've heard that's been popular over the years is intelligence-led enforcement. Well, intelligence doesn't lead law enforcement. It simply puts the whole picture together so the best decisions can be made. Intelligence makes sense of all of the raw information and guides decision-making. All intelligence officers or intelligence analysts can do is say, this is what the information says, this is my recommendation. And then the managers, the decision makers have to take that into consideration when they make a decision. Well, we've got COs out on the ground. We've got thousands of hunters and anglers across the landscape. We've got members of the general public. All kinds of folks have information. Some of them might not even know they have the information, but they've got it. Unless that information gets collected and analyzed by an intelligence unit, it's only of local value, maybe. If it's not, it might not even be used at all if people don't know what they've got. Now, MNR Law Enforcement's had an intelligence unit for years, or intelligence program rather, for years. But it tended to always to be fragmented. Resulted in really good information, but it was mostly used at the local level. It was a challenge to join all of the dots and use the available data to see the bigger picture. That's especially problematic when you're dealing with a big commercial violation or a really complex investigation. So we knew we could do better. And we've begun a modernization just in the last year and a half to completely modernize the intelligence program in enforcement branch. We'll be collecting more information and we're going to collect it in a way that's not really been considered in the past. And here's an example. We have the TIPS MNR program, and the information comes in, it's given to an officer, they investigate it. They may or may not lay a charge. They may not find anything that lays to a charge, but it's all good stuff. Up to this point, there's all of that information stored in the database that's never really been looked at for the information itself. So rather than the face value of the tip, all of this information that's in there, now this new intelligence unit, we're going to data mine that pile of information, and we know that there's little gold nuggets in there that we can use. MNR is actually one of only a few non-police agencies that's a level 1 member of an organization called CISO. It's the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario. It's mostly police agencies, but membership, especially at the level 1, which is quite prestigious for a non-police agency, membership gives us access to extra staff, specialty equipment, intelligence that they might have, expertise, and vice versa. For example, MNR happens to be, no surprise, really good at installing remote surveillance cameras and equipment in the bush. So if the police have a need to set up things in the bush, they often will come to us and ask us to assist them. And then vice versa, if we have something to do in a really urban setting, they may assist us. So I'll give you an example of how intelligence brings things together. Maybe 100 separate pieces of information into a picture that shows the full scope. So this picture here, assume each one of these little pockets is information that a CO knows. So there's 10 different COs have 10 different pieces of information sitting in their head or written down in their book. They're all separate. I mean, who's this guy in the middle, sitting there all by himself? Who knows? Who is he? There's people, there's events, there's vehicles, there's phone numbers, there's locations, all kinds of stuff. If the information stays in the heads of those officers, it might be forgotten, might be ignored. At best, it might only be used locally. But when the information is collected and analyzed for intelligence value, that's what we see. This is a real, actually, an actual investigation text plot. Turns out that guy in the middle, that's Mr. Big. All of the scraps of information came together with a whole bunch of other stuff that we didn't even know was connected. And it turns out that the keystone to the whole operation is that buddy in the middle that earlier on we had no idea was connected to anything. Any one of these pieces of information or the lines that connect them can break a case wide open. And if that line isn't there, the whole investigation may not even get started. Now, this is done with a combination of a sophisticated computer program, but one of the things that you can never get rid of is the human element. And intelligence analysts use years of experience, their training, all that sort of thing, to take what the computer shows them and actually make sense so that you can use it in real life. Let's talk about DNA. Well, DNA and the use of DNA forensics in natural resources law enforcement. First, let's do a theory on DNA. Of course, we all know that the structure of DNA of all species is comprised of 2 helical chains, each coiled around the same axis, each with a pitch of 34 angstroms and a radius of 10 angstroms. And everybody knows that DNA molecules are double-stranded helices and numbers. And what? What in the world did I just say? We don't need to know how it works. We just need to know that it does work. All living things are made up of cells. And science can see bits of DNA that are located on the chromosomes of those cells. And DNA is unique to every individual. Law enforcement uses DNA to link evidence found at the scene of a crime to the evidence found somewhere else. It's just like CSI, sort of. We get the work done at Trent University, and we'll go into what they can do for us. So here's an example. we find a site where, say, a moose was killed illegally. The officer suspects that a moose hanging at Joe's camp is that illegal moose. The officer takes a sample of tissue from the kill site, and it doesn't have to be very much, takes a sample from the suspect moose, ships them off to Trent University, and they do some DNA comparison work on it. And this is what essentially what comes back. The bar on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the DNA fingerprint, if you will, of the sample taken from the kill site. There was 3 moose hanging at the camp. See moose number 1 and moose number 3, they don't match that bar down the left-hand side. But we see that the bar for moose number 2 is identical. The fingerprint matches, busted. If the DNA in both samples are a match, it's pretty strong evidence that that's the animal that was associated with the kill. Now, this example is actually pretty simple, but DNA can also be used on things like processed meat in sausages. Along with matching individual samples, DNA can also ID things like species. Is that animal a wolf, or a wolf-dog cross, or just a big dog that looks like a wolf? They can tell gender, that's pretty simple, male and female. They can determine what population an animal came from. For example, is the walleye from this lake or that lake? And they can also tell parentage. So is the animal a captive bred animal, or is it actually wild stock being passed off as captive bred? The analysis time for a DNA sample is way faster than it used to be. When I started, it was weeks or months by the time they could work this stuff out. It's way faster than it used to be, but this is where there's some TV magic. It is not like CSI, where they take a swab and they put it in a machine that they carry in the back of their car, and 5 seconds later a picture of the suspect pops out. That's magic. It's not that fast. Back when I started as well, you used to have chunks of samples as big as this, like a cube of meat. Nowadays, theoretically, as long as they have a single cell and there's DNA in there, they can replicate it. So the days of having massive samples is gone. It's tremendous what they can do. So even since or now, a trace of DNA may be sufficient, it's really unlikely that a violator can clean up a scene enough. When we combine things like our canine teams finding items to sample and other science, what you do see on TV is in the murder mysteries like CSI, they come into a room and it all looks fine to the naked eye, and they spray this stuff called luminol around, and all of a sudden where the blood apparently was cleaned up, it all glows. We have access to that. So all we need is a trace. And if there's a trace that can have DNA work done on it, chances are we can get it. And I mentioned Trent University. MNR and Trent have a fantastic partnership in the DNA world for both fish and wildlife management purposes and law enforcement. And according to Trent, MNR was actually the first government agency in Canada to use DNA analysis to enforce hunting regulations. And I'm not sure the actual case they're talking about. It may have been me. Back in the early 90s, I did a moose case when I was in Chapleau, where we had a kill site. We had, the suspect had blood on his pants, and we were able to tie the blood on the pants to the kill site, and the fellow pled guilty as soon as the DNA evidence was revealed. And it was one of the first times that we had used DNA for wildlife, so that was kind of cool. One of the things that MNR Enforcement Branch is doing is online enforcement. How many of you have heard of this thing called the internet? It's getting more and more popular. I can hardly use this controller or my cell phone, but some people, especially the younger generations, they live through their electronic devices and social media. If we didn't have Facebook, the world would come to an end. Texting their brother and sister, they're both on the same couch, texting one another. So we see it every day in the news. People can be really silly about what they post on the internet. A tweet about what I had for lunch, as if someone cares. Apparently they do. Why would you tweet about it? And it's out there. It's out there for everybody. I mean, there's the dark side too. We see in the news cyberbullying, things like that. People put stuff on the internet they would never say in person. Everybody likes to brag on occasion. This is anglers and hunters. There's nobody who has not made up a story. Fish always get bigger when you're talking around the wood stove. The me generation likes to publish their tall tales and all manner of other information online. The problem is, when it's done online, it's there forever. Can't be deleted, can't be retrieved, and you can't control where it ends up after you press send. So once something's blasted into space as electrons, it's potentially available for everybody to see. So MNR has an enforcement unit called CONET, or CONET. It's dedicated to using the internet to catch violators. It's often commercial. A lot of people do all of their transactions. They don't go to a store anymore. Everything's bought online, but not always. We do some deep dive type investigations that are, you're after more sort of complex violators, but for the most part, the catches are right up in your face. You don't have to search very hard. Here's an example. This is an actual Facebook posting that contained a bunch of videos, several actually, of a person whose hobby it was to go and chase moose down the road with their car. The names of the violators were plainly posted, along with recordings of their voices, the locations, discussions. One of their friends reposted the video. CONET found out about it. We investigated. He and his partners were all convicted for harassing wildlife. While we were in there looking at all of this online stuff, the team found evidence of even more violations that were plainly posted. Hunting out of season, all kinds of things, posted right there on their Facebook page. Online classified sites like eBay and Kijiji are sometimes used by people to commit wildlife crimes. It's mostly the sale of fish and wildlife, and live wildlife is pretty common. Some, perhaps many actually, they're not aware of the laws. So MNR has partnered with Kijiji to educate folks before they commit crimes online. And what Kijiji did with our assistance in the writing is, when you go on their site, if you go onto the place where you would want to sell wildlife or sell live wildlife, there's a big warning right there that says, before you do this, it might be illegal. Better check with your natural resources group. Check with your municipality, because some municipalities have laws. And then Kijiji themselves says, we don't sell snakes. You're not allowed to sell a snake on Kijiji. But they were very supportive of trying to get the message out so that people didn't use their website to commit crimes. It's funny though, with the CONET team, we get these Kijiji ads or online classifieds, and regularly, the officers will either email the person selling or phone them up and say, conservation officer so-and-so from the MNR, I see your ad on there. I just need to tell you, you're not allowed to sell that. It's against the law. And they explain it to them, and the person goes, oh yeah, okay. And then we come back in 2 days later, and it's still there. So an undercover officer phones them up and makes the sale. And what can they say? We already phoned you up and told you not to do it, and you did it anyhow. Joint Forces operations. This is something that's getting more and more of a technique that we use. And it makes so much sense. It's a wonder we haven't got to it earlier. Historically, law enforcement agencies tended to hoard information. Turf wars were really common. I'm not telling you, and I'm going to hold this, and I want to make the arrest. You see it all the time in TV and probably in real life, where the FBI comes in and the county sheriff doesn't, their nose is all out of joint, and what are you doing here, and we're not going to tell you, and all that sort of thing. How counterproductive is that? Natural resources agencies, we've come to know that we need each other. It's not about who protects the resource, it's about protecting the resource. MNR law enforcement has an excellent relationship even with Ontario's police services. For example, MNR provides an instructor to the OPP's launch boat training. MNR canine units support both in training in the field, the OPP especially. All of our new recruits attend the Ontario Police College alongside the police recruits to get that common introductory law enforcement training. An MNR enforcement branch actually is a national leader in teaching all natural resources agencies undercover operatives in Canada. MNR is a recognized leader in that business. So it's becoming really common for natural resources agencies to band together in what's known as joint forces operations. Usually they're for big-scale offenses that impact one or more jurisdiction, but not necessarily. It's really common for MNR to join up with Environment Canada's Wildlife Enforcement Division, the border state agencies, and the provinces, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is a really good example of a recent one from November. We had some influence from Manitoba, New York State, Ontario, Wildlife Enforcement Division, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Attorney, both border services, and there was another agency, and I can't remember who it was. We all got together, investigated, and were successful in convicting this fellow who was selling snakehead fish, importing them and selling them. If we had each tried to investigate this separately, we'd probably still be at it, or we'd messed it up somehow. In fact, there was a situation in the U.S. not that long ago where a state natural resources enforcement group spent months doing an undercover natural resources investigation on a person. The person they were investigating turned out to be a U.S. Fish and Wildlife undercover person who was investigating them, simply because they didn't talk. Embarrassing, but it makes a great story, and true. It was Florida. Let's talk about some of the cool stuff. Night vision goggles. Night vision equipment have been around for a long time. Some of the early stuff that I've used, it was big, it was clunky. I think you had to carry around 2 car batteries with you to power the stuff. And you could barely, you might as well have not even had it. It was green, it moved, you could say, well, I think there's something there. That was the best you could do. The equipment they have nowadays is almost as good as broad daylight. This is a picture from our aviation and fire group. The photo on the left is what you would see in this picture with the naked eye. The photo on the right is what you see with night vision goggles. Oh, geez, there's a truck there. There's a fence, and actually an airport runway in behind. There's another one. This is what you'd see on the left without the goggles. With the goggles on, there's bushes, there's another fence, there's a post. There's even a light on the right-hand picture in the background. There was a light there and you couldn't see it without the goggles. And these things, I think they run with, instead of the big batteries, they run on like watch batteries or something, and they last for a long time. It's pretty impressive. The helicopter pilots actually use these things to fly. They can land in the pitch dark wearing these goggles. Here's one that has an application for law enforcement. So the picture on the left, again, what you'd see with no night vision goggles. Black as the inside of a cow. Put the goggles on, you can see there's a pipeline or a power line down there, all the trees. And I think you can see it. There's a kind of a, there's kind of a dot right there. That dot is one of those fire log things that you use. It's a 2.5-hour fire log. It's been out for 3.5 hours. Put the night vision goggles on and you can still see the embers from 2,000 feet. So that fire log could just as easily be a flashlight or even a cigarette from a night hunter. And we do use these, as I said, the helicopter pilots and the fixed-wing pilots wear these goggles. We have others for spotters. And we do fly in areas where intelligence has told us to go, and fly looking for night hunters in the fall. And the pilots wearing some, the spotters wearing some, and the CO vehicles on the ground, they stay well away. And we have these little ultraviolet strobe lights that are essentially invisible to the naked eye on each of the vehicles. So vehicle 1 has 1 blinky light, vehicle 2 has 2, and et cetera. So from the air, the helicopter can be up, you can see the night hunter or someone shining fields, and you can say, okay, vehicle 3, go up, turn on this road, and all that sort of thing, do all the control from the air in the pitch black using this stuff. Pretty neat. Here's another example of some visual equipment. You can all see the ship there, I'm sure, right? This is a picture of a ship in the fog. With some technological enhancements, you put it on the camera, that's what you see. Same camera with the lens and the technology attached to it. And that's a big ship. You couldn't see that at all in the fog. In fact, there's a person down in the bottom right-hand corner that nobody knew was there either. Similar camera work. With high-tech cameras and stabilization, which is really important. In this particular case, in the picture on the left, in the crosshairs is a little tiny white dot. If you zoom in 4.5 kilometers away, with a little bit of extra focus, you can read that sign. Another example of distance. Picture on the right, you actually can't even hardly see it. There's a skyscraper out there in that red box. You zoom in from over 6.5 kilometers away through the haze, and you can see that platform, and in the video, you can see its people walking around on it. You didn't even know the platform was there, let alone the skyscraper, let alone the people, all with the camera tech stuff that we have access to these days. Another one. So this guy on the left, I'm not sure if you can see it in the picture. He's kind of, on the right-hand picture, right in the middle of all those headlights coming down the road, he's standing at the side of the road. So you're taking a picture from over 0.5 kilometer away into the lights at night, and if that was the suspect you were looking for and you knew who he was, you can ID that guy. That's how good this equipment is. So what about drones? Everybody always asks about drones. Do they have a role to play in natural resources law enforcement? They're certainly becoming more available, right off the shelf. Remember that one in the bottom there for later on. A drone just like that one on the bottom took this picture. This is a picture of the Otonabee River in Peterborough, taken from a quadcopter with an off-the-shelf GoPro camera stuck on it. So are they available to law enforcement? Well, we're sure exploring the application of them. The police already have some, and we have access to them if we want to borrow them. So what's next? Some of these things come in all sizes, from as small as this one. It's the size of a bumblebee. And I thought about bringing it. I thought about bringing it here and flying it across the people. And then I thought, what would the article look like in the Out of Doors magazine? MNR crashes drone into Angelo Lombardo. Cuts executive director for 8 stitches. So I decided we weren't quite ready for that. Of course, I could have had Mark fly it, and then it wouldn't have been my fault. It's delegation, right? So the sky truly is the limit in technology. This is just a few examples of what we've got. Technology's coming fast and furious, but I do want to point out it doesn't mean that we just go to full technology. You can't do fish and wildlife law enforcement sitting at your office looking at a computer. We still need people out on the ground doing old-fashioned game warden work, and we'll always have to do that. But who knows what's next? I don't know. That's it. Questions? I can't, of course, show you any of this stuff or actually reveal too much, but I'm willing to answer questions if you've got any. I know lunch is right around the corner. All right.